Hi, everybody. Welcome to Conversations with Calvin, We the Species. And It's a special interview for me because I was a guest um, on Laura's podcast a few weeks ago. Books and Brews, or I'm saying it
Yeah.
backward, Books and Brews on
Books and
the
Brews.
and,
Yes.
and we met, and it was kind of poignant for me because the beer and the book and talking about that and Laura, I forget how we met, but I invited Laura to come on conversation with Calvin, and she's just about as fascinating uh, a person as I've met. Her and by the way, that background you're looking at, that's real stuff. That's what she got to look at. That's
Yep. That's my view as I come home every day.
That's a view out there in Tennessee. And we've been talking for a while. I can't appreciate that because I open up my window in the kitchen and I look out and I see all 8 million of my neighbors.
Right. My neighbors are cows,
Yeah,
so
wow.
they
And
don't bother me.
and we'll talk about it because she's gone from being a really a best-selling author for sure, and the numbers that you were talking about, best-selling author, and we'll talk about the Blue Bells Chronicles and her work, and then she's done some stuff to give out awards to. She went from that kind of a life to farming, and that's a wow for me who has no concept what a farm is. Um, Although we're the Garden State here in New Jersey, but nevertheless, so I take my hat off, tip my hat to your journey. So you are the Blue Bells Chronicles. You grew up in the military, as I'm reading my
Yep.
notes.
In the
You,
Air Force.
yeah, and you visited. You'll talk about that castles
Yeah.
and stuff in Germany and England and historic site. Your background is also in music because you got a degree in music.
Right.
So
Hmm.
what a background, what a life, what a journey. And so I'm really thrilled that we're together now, Laura. So why don't you
Thank
just
you.
give a little bit of a little background, and then we'll talk.
Well, this is always one of those where to start questions. As you said, I grew up in the military, and I think that's really impacted my writing because when you grow up in the military, some people say, what a horrible thing to do to your kids. I think it's the best possible way to grow up. As you said, I saw castles in Germany. I believe I was actually taken to one of the Holocaust museums when I was very young. So I just saw everything. I saw it up and down the East Coast, a lot of the historic sites. I was at Kitty Hawk, where the first airplanes were flown by Orville and Wilbur Wright. Uh, we saw so many amazing things. We met so many different types of people. A lot of people, if you grow up in your hometown, you know the people who are pretty much just like you. But when you grow up in the military, you're meeting people from all sorts of backgrounds. You're meeting people in Germany, people in the South, people on the East Coast, people in the Midwest. You learn a lot about people and human nature. And so I thought it was a wonderful way to grow up. And I did major in music. I played trombone for probably about 25 years. And I played in orchestras, pit orchestras. I played for ballets, for community theater and jazz bands. And unfortunately, I got something called embouchure dystonia. So I can play trombone still, but it sounds pretty bad now because of the condition. And so I taught music lessons for 32 years. And at some point in my life, I said, I always wanted to write. I used to write. I need to get back to writing. And so I wrote the Blue Bells Chronicles, and it starts, there we go, perfect.
Yes,
It
yes.
starts with book one, The Blue Bells of Scotland, and it's named that because the main character is a trombone player. And I always say he's an obnoxious and arrogant trombone player, 99% of trombonists are going to go, well, that's kind of redundant. Aren't we all like that? So you can see what attitude we have about ourselves. But ironically, I'm actually married to probably the only other person in the world who plays trombone and organ like I did. And and so poor Sean, he's having so much fun in life. Life is about having fun. He's a fantastic musician, fantastic businessman. So he has become very wealthy by the age of 24. He can throw the wildest parties, and the orchestra isn't going to fire him. At least he thinks they're not, because he's making them very wealthy with his business skills and his music and his charisma. And finally, his girlfriend has enough. And when they're on tour in Scotland, she leaves him up in the top of a castle keep. And it's the ruins. It's based on Urquhart Castle now. I'm sorry, what is Urquhart Castle, but I call it Glenmuir for the reason that I learned too much about the history of Urquhart, and I couldn't suspend the disbelief for myself to say these things happened to Sean and the Laird and Neil because I knew what really happened. So I had to make a fictional castle. And just for the record, our farm is called Glenmuir after my fictional castle. And so Sean wakes up in the wrong century. Now, his counterpart, a medieval warrior, also is left by his betrothed. They also have a fight at the top of the tower. He also goes to sleep at the top of that tower on the same date, but in 1314. And they wake up each in the other man's time. And so the story goes from there. Sean is now caught in the time of Robert the Bruce, 1314, just before the Battle of Bannockburn, which is Scotland's greatest victory. And all of a sudden, he doesn't have his money and his fame and his social power that he has in our time. And he finds that when he behaves with women, like the kind of playboy that he is in modern America, he finds that doesn't go over so well with Scottish fathers in medieval times. And he doesn't have the money to buy his way out of the messes he is so good at getting into. And so the story goes from there, and it's very historic, right down to the weather, right down to there's a sewer under the English town of Carlisle that was actually only found fairly recently, like within the last 15 years, but just on time for my book. It's accurate down to a bishop taking a trip. That actually became sort of key to my novel. And so I've written a few other books too. I'm working on a few others, but that's the book part of it. And then I do run the podcast, Books and Brews. And I've been doing that since 2017. And I don't have your numbers of interviews, which is amazing and impressive. But over the years, I've interviewed, I want to say about 120 authors now, and still going and having a lot of fun.
It is a lot of fun, and your numbers are very impressive. By the way, like I said before we went on air, I asked AI, and the 5.5. You've been doing it way longer than 5.5 years. You're probably in the top 1/10%. By
I
the
have
way,
to look that up
look it
and
up.
see.
With
Yeah,
I mean, you're talking about 9 years you've been doing this.
right.
And I'm 5.5 years, and I'm in the top 0.5%. You must
Mhm.
be, you might be one of the top five in the world. I mean, and I'm being serious.
Well, I definitely don't have, I mean, I listen to a lot of YouTubers who have, a million followers, 500,000, whatever. And I think for a long time, my co host Michael and I were doing interviews just once a month. And it's about in the last 18 months that I've expanded it to doing Books and Brews Light so that I have interviews to upload ideally every week. We do live on a farm, life is unpredictable here. So it doesn't happen on a schedule like some people can do, but I think it does help. And I'm sure my numbers have changed since I started doing that.
Okay. What first sparked your interest in history and storytelling? Where did that come from?
Well, I think storytelling and the interest in history are different. I've actually been writing almost since I was capable of writing. So I wrote a poem when I was 8, and that's lost to posterity, which is most likely a good thing. I started a novel when I was 10 and discovered that O. Henry had already written that plot, which was, if you know the story of the ransom of Red Chief, it's a story where this couple of kidnappers kidnaps a little boy, and they're going to get this ransom from his wealthy parents. And when they send the ransom note, his parents are like, "You took him, he's your problem now." And pretty soon, these kidnappers are begging the parents, "Take him back. We can't handle him." So that was kind of my idea when I was 10. And I started writing the story of Timmy, who gets kidnapped and is such a terror that the kidnappers want to give him back and have to pay to give him back. And then I saw the Ransom of Red Chief on my parents' shelf and went, ah, it's been written already. So, I've wanted to tell stories and I've written stories since I was quite young. The interest in history, I think that really only came when I started researching for the Blue Bells of Scotland. And I didn't quite finish why it's called that because Sean plays trombone. The Blue Bells of Scotland is what's called a theme and variation that a lot of trombonists want to play because it shows off what the instrument can do and just how skilled and talented you are. And so in the book, this is his signature piece. He plays it at the end of every concert and he elaborates on the already incredibly technically difficult things going on in the piece, and people love it. And I thought, well, if that's his signature piece, the book has to take place in Scotland. And the original words of it's from an old folk song. And the folk song talks about noble deeds, streaming banners. That's the kind of book I like to read, about these grand adventures and things and noble deeds. And so I thought, well, that's probably going to be in a war. And so as I started doing the research, well, what war happened in Scottish history? I mean, I knew almost nothing when I started this. And the more I researched, the more interesting it got. Now, I guess, sometime before that, I had read historical fiction. So that definitely sparked an interest in history. But researching it, the more you delve into it, it's true that that truth is stranger than fiction. You can't make some of this up. And I'm trying to remember now, there were one or two things in particular that I wrote in these books that are historically true. And I thought if I had made this up, nobody would believe it. But I can write it only because it's actually historically true. It really did happen, but you wouldn't believe it if a fiction writer made it up.
Why do you think there's such a fascination in literature with time travel?
I think because if you know anything about history, historical figures can seem so foreign to us. We live in this very modern world with cell phones, with computers. I mean, even in the 60s and 70s, we had cars, we had a spaceship going to the moon. And so we have no understanding of what it is to live in, say, an agrarian society where you're dependent on a horse, you're dependent on feeding the animals, you're dependent on a handheld plow. Your weapons are spears, your defense is a shield. We can't relate to it in one way. So it's interesting to us. And I think there's always the question of who would I be if I hadn't been born into this world of cars and convenience and grocery stores? How would I make it? I mean, even if you're the royalty, my grandmother used to always say, I live better than a king because I breathe the same air they did, I eat the same food they did, and yet I have indoor plumbing, I have heat in the winter. And I think there's a lot of truth to that. Even if you're the king, everybody wants to kill you, at least in medieval times, maybe not today. because they want your position. And so I think that's fascinating to us. Would I be able to survive in those times? Would I have been the princess? Would I have been the peasant? What would it be like to live in this world of knights and fluttering banners and jousting? We romanticize it,
Yeah.
but we also wonder, what was it really like, and could I have done it?
Okay. Um, this Scottish, it's funny, one of my favorite songs that I listen to is Loch Lomond.
I love that song.
I can't tell you how many times I listened to that. There's something about that. And of course, I don't know anything much about Scotland and stuff, but I listen to that. It's like a carpet. It just lifts me up and takes me places. But I always listen. And I don't know how many people told you that they always listen to Loch Lomond, but I always do because it's just something about it. For decades and decades. But the Scottish Highlands almost feel like a character in your books. Why Scotland?
Because the song is the Blue Bells of Scotland. So I figured it wouldn't make sense to set it in France.
Sure.
I mean, before that, I really knew almost nothing about Scotland, but it's really turned into a place I absolutely love. And even when you start to understand the difference between the Highlanders and thank you, yeah, and the Lowlanders, it's a fascinating place with a fascinating history.
History, history,
Mhm.
precious history. Um, what kind of research goes into recreating medieval Scotland so vividly?
Well, hundreds of hours. Let me grab something that is behind me, a couple of things. Part of it is books, going on forums, asking questions. Part of it is I try to be very
Wow,
surrounded myself with Scottish history so you can kind of see, the fake background wipes it out, but you can kind of see the medieval helmet.
wow,
And we have a couple of claymores. What else do I have back here? I have my two-headed axe, and this is fancier by far than what Robert the Bruce would have had, but this was his favorite weapon. And so I've hiked the hills in medieval boots, the actual hills Sean would have gone up and down. I visited the places. When I have something like this, when you feel the actual weight in your hand, it brings history much more alive to you. And so I know what it is to hold a claymore. And they're only about 8 pounds. But, if you think, what is it to have this helmet on your head to be holding this 8 pound sword that stretches out 4 or 5 feet and to do it all day in the heat? It brings it alive. Now, let me tell you an interesting story about Robert the Bruce and his two-headed axe, which, as I said, would not have been as fancy as this. This is one of the stories that I think if I'd made it up, people would have said that's a little far-fetched. On the first day of Bannockburn, it lasted 2 days. I believe it was the 23rd and 24th, might have been the 24th and 25th. On the first day, Robert the Bruce on his little Garon, which is kind of like a Connemara pony, so it's small. It was approximately 5,000 Scots against approximately 20,000 English. The Scots were on little ponies, the English were on giant war horses. The Scots had leather armor, the English had, their metal armor and their helmets. And young Henry de Bohun saw his chance. He saw the King of Scots, recognized him by the gold band around his head, riding his little pony back and forth in front of his troops. And he said, hey, this is easy pickings. I'm going to charge on my big war horse across this field. I'm going to kill the King of Scots in front of his men. Battle's going to be over before it's begun, and I will be the hero. Well, he didn't really count on just how good Robert the Bruce was with his two-headed axe. And so Robert the Bruce just watched him come, marched back and forth. At the last minute, stood up in his stirrups and slammed this axe right down the middle of Henry's head. Henry was wearing a helmet, mind you, like the one I just showed you. And yet he drove it with such force it went down to his sternum at least. And so that tells you something about number one, what kind of damage that can do. You know, when you hold it yourself, you think, what does it take to have that kind of force? And it starts to bring the world alive to you. So, you know, having the weapons, we have a lot of medieval weapons in the house. We've got medieval musical instruments. That includes a sackbut, which is the medieval form of a trombone, and it's different from a trombone. It's different to play. It's similar, but a little bit different. All of these things bring it to life and help you to write it. So, as I said, we also went to the Highlands. We went to Carlisle in England, which is one of the settings in my book where Sean and Neil are sent to spy on the English. And so I got to see the town they were actually in, a lot of, you know, the medieval structures. Some of them are still there. And I would go on forums. I would actually talk to people in Scotland. You know, am I getting this right? Am I getting that right? Being there, I learned about gnats. And so, a word to all American authors who want to write about Scotland, you need to know about the gnats. It's a question you don't know to ask unless you go there. So, yes, just constant ongoing reading and travel.
Okay. Um, uh, if readers take an emotional something from the Blue Bells, what would you want that to be?
I'm sorry, say that again.
If readers take one emotional element from the Blue Bell Chronicles, what would you want that emotional thing to be?
I would want it to be the idea of redemption that, you know, and in a way, I hate to say that because it makes it sound like it's this very heavy story. And I think it's not. They're long books, but I've only ever heard readers say they fly through these books, that they don't feel like long books. And that's because Sean, in addition to being a horrible person, you know, he's a womanizer, he cheats on his girlfriend, he gambles, he throws parties, gets into trouble, you know, sexually harasses women, no doubt. He's also funny. He's also generous. You know, he's doing things behind the scenes. He doesn't want anyone to see this good part of him. And so it's not a heavy book. It's very heavy on the history, but I think in a good way that brings it to life, a very humanistic way. But ultimately, it is the story of how Sean redeems himself. And I think that's important because he's very much on the wrong track in life. And let's face it, all of us at some point or another are putting ourselves on the wrong track in one way or another. And I think it's important to say, you know what, we can always change. We can always stop and take a look and say, maybe I was wrong. Maybe my ideas were wrong. Maybe I can do better by myself and by other people and treat other people better and be better.
Okay. Nicely said. Nicely said. I like that word, redemption. It's a great word. Hmm. Um, uh, if you could personally travel to any particular historical era, where would you go?
You know, I like safety. The more I study, Timeline by Michael Crichton. To me, that's one of the most realistic time travel novels because in most of the movies and novels, they go back to these brutal eras where they don't have the skills and somehow they survive it all. Michael Crichton, they plan, they train, they learn everything they can. They go back to this time, I think it's medieval France they go to, and within the first 5 minutes, one of them is killed. And I'm like, you know what? That's the way it's going to be. Most of us are not equipped to withstand medieval times. We just aren't. I'd probably go somewhere relatively safe, like, I don't know, the 1950s in California. Um, you know, if I would love to see medieval times, but I'd have to figure out a way that it would be safe. You know, I can appear in a castle, have a feast, and go home again.
Well,
I'm
that,
not a risk taker.
no. And it's funny, I never dwelled on that. And I for sure, and what you just said was very profound to me. For sure, I couldn't I couldn't go back to those days and have to survive that. That's
Right.
not my thing. But the most comfortable place for me would be the 50s because it was safe. It was
Relatively speaking,
safe,
yes.
and we weren't really overburdened with a nuclear war.
I think it was a time of great hope.
Yep.
I think we'd just come out of World War II and it was the poodle skirts and this very uplifting,
Yeah,
upbeat music. And, rock was just,
yeah, correct. You, I just you lost your sound. Try it again. I don't hear you. Try talking.
can you hear me now?
Fine now.
Okay.
It's got a little
I have
thing.
no idea what happened.
All right, it's fine. This is very informal. But anyway, the 50s, the Back to the Future 50s. By the way, it's so funny. The other day, I walked out taking my garbage can. Watch where I go with this. And the gardener was there, and he said hello. He kind of doesn't really know me, but he said
Mhm.
hello, and then he said to me, "You look like the guy from Back to the Future
Oh, funny.
with
Well,
my
with the hair.
with
Right,
the hair."
right.
And I got hysterical laughing because I guess he's right. It was precious. It was really funny.
We have a picture of my husband when he had grown his hair out long and it's standing out like this in his big white beard and he's doing this with his tongue making a face and he kind of looks the same.
Laura, with all your military, the military background, as you were saying it, does that also help to shape and mold your fascination with history? The fact that
I, right. Definitely, definitely. When you think that some of my very earliest memories are the castles in Germany, even just being in Germany, our country is 250 years old. We've been here a little longer, since the colonists, but Germany goes back, 1,500 years, 2,000, maybe not 2,000, but it goes back 1,000, 1,200 years. And so even just being there when you're in the towns, you're in these places with medieval buildings, with medieval gates. One of my earliest memories, and I'm embarrassed to say how old I was before I realized this was probably not a true story, but from my earliest memories, among them is being in this town where they had the pig fest every year. And they would roast these pigs on the big spits, the complete pig from tail to snout on the spit. And the story I was told, this is when I was, 3, 4 years old, was that they have this pig fest every year because back in medieval times, there was an invading army coming. And so they closed the gates and they pushed a carrot through the two loops that held the gates together. And then a pig came along and ate the carrot. And so the invading army got in and, it was awful. And so every year in retaliation, they roast pigs. I'm embarrassed to say how old I was. You just accept what you're told as a child.
sure,
And one year as an adult, I doubt that they really secured the gate against an invading army with the carrot. But that's the story. So when you grow up with history as your background, or going to Jamestown, or going to, I'm trying to think now, some of the historic sites close to DC, going to the Smithsonian every Sunday for 3 years. I hated it at the time. Don't ever do that to an 11-year-old. But it gave me a very strong background in history and really thinking about how other people lived, how this country was settled, how other countries lived.
wow, interesting, interesting. And you can't really, having not done that kind of stuff, it's hard to appreciate. And I am a history person. I love history, and I guess it was George Santayana, a great historian, said those who forget history are condemned to relive it.
Exactly.
Something
Hmm.
along those lines. So, and that's what I would really wanted to study. I didn't want to study pharmacy. I wanted to
Hmm.
study history because I love history, but my mother made me become a pharmacist, so I had to study
Well,
it.
It's a more practical field, I'll tell you that.
Yeah, yeah,
But
certainly. And I did it for 12 years, and then one day I just stopped because I
hmm
had to get that thing in my belly out, and that's to create and
hmm
to write, which is what I'm finally doing now, 30, 40, 50 years later. But at
right.
least I'm doing it,
Yeah,
Um, you've been you're, as you discussed, you've been a life. By the way, I can't picture you playing a trombone,
that's funny. Why not?
I don't know. It just, I just don't, maybe a
Uh-huh.
violin. I don't know. Um, but so you've been a lifelong musician. How does that affect, how does that influence and affect your writing, that music? Does it come into your writing?
Very much so. And I think in two completely different ways. One way, obviously, is that the characters play instruments. The book has the backdrop of this modern American orchestra. And so, when I'm talking about the flute players, I actually played flute at a very, very high level too. I wouldn't say professional, but close to it. Um, that also is affected by the embouchure dystonia, unfortunately, but I know everything there is to know about playing the flute. I have played violin, not well, but I know all these things. I know intimately the range of the instrument, what's practical, and on just about all instruments. I do play most of the wind instruments, everything except oboe. And I know something about what it is to play a French horn, how you have to have your hand exactly right in the bell for the tuning, and so on. Things like how to make the slide on a trombone work. It takes some doing to make it stay smooth. So I know what it is to be in the green room. I know something about the parts. I know something about there's some truth to the personalities. Trombone players do tend to have a certain personality. Flute players tend to have a certain sort of personality. Trombone players, for instance, I've always said we get into trouble, but it's the composer's fault because they don't give us enough notes to play. And so I know all of this because I've been there. But in another way, so it did impact the book because they're musicians. Because I'm thinking about the music of the orchestra, I'm thinking about what music was in medieval Scotland at the time. And in fact, on my YouTube channel, Harp Writer, I have a series of videos where I play Scottish or medieval music in Scottish and medieval locations. And so I do enjoy that because I can give the reader a feel for it. But I think another way that music impacts writing is when you've been in music for years, you have sort of an ear for melody, for rhythm, for um, silence. So for the notes versus the rest, which would be, in writing, are you using these quick, short sentences? Which would be a certain style of music, the staccato. Are you using these long flowing phrases, which would be the legato? How are you interspersing pauses, which would be the line breaks or the period? And so I think you develop an ear for this sound that also comes out in writing, even though we don't think of writing as being sound in the same way.
Um, what has decades of teaching taught you about creativity and human potential? Um, I mean, that's such an honorable.
Right. It's really taught me that it's more about what you put into it than what you're naturally born with. And I've had students on all ends of the spectrum. I had one student, she didn't see, in fact, two of them that I'm thinking of. Now, this one particular little girl was very smart. I spent probably 18 months teaching her. She could not seem to learn to read C, D, E, F, G in treble clef. I do wonder at this point, I've often wondered, was this because she really didn't want to learn and she was just playing games because she didn't like lessons. I mean, she seemed to like me. She was always very pleasant. But I think it was too, I learned something about, okay, parenting. I had a few kids in Seattle in the 90s, and they kept telling me, I don't have time to practice. And one day I finally said, yes, you do. We're going through your week and we're going to find where you have 10 minutes a day to practice. By the time a couple of these kids took me through their schedule, they had tennis, they had scouts, they had a chess club, they had I know in one case, I think in both these cases, they had Hebrew school on Saturday. They had, it just went on and on. And I, as the teacher, they had, 1 to 3 activities every day of the week, to the point even I, as a teacher, said, you're right. You literally don't have time to practice. Um, so, that's one thing. But as far as talent, I've had these kids who really didn't seem to have a lot of talent. One girl, I don't think she'd mind me saying her name. She'd probably be in her 40s by now. Her name was Van Marie, and I always thought it was the most beautiful name. And she was the nicest girl. I don't think she had a lot of talent, but she worked and she worked steadily. She practiced like she was supposed to every day of the week. And eventually she got to be quite good, better than I thought she ever would have, because she did the work. I have had other students who have the talent, but they're just gonna, goof off. They're not gonna do the work, and they don't get to where they should be because they have the talent to be there. And, then on the flip side, I had one boy. He was incredible. He was 7 years old. His parents were musicians. That's another thing I've learned is musical talent does seem to be very much genetic, not always, but very often. And this little boy at the age of 7, he flew through like the first 4 levels of the series I worked in. Most students took maybe about a year to get through each level, maybe 6 months to a year and a half would be the average. This boy flew through 4 levels, I think, in his first year of lessons, to the point, I mean, he came back each week. And by the time he was 10, I have no doubt he played better than I did. In my defense, my major instrument never was piano, but I was always better than my students. And he would come back and he would play these things, just the chords going here and the melody going there, not looking at his hands. And I just looked at that and went, I'm not teaching this kid. I don't know where this is coming from. I'm sitting here with him half an hour a week, but I did not teach him that.
That's
That
genetic.
that it's God-given talent. His dad was a professional musician, so he was, maybe getting, I don't know if he was getting help at home. All I knew was this kid has such raw talent. He's he should be on stage one day. He's going to be one of the ones who can be a performer and a solo performer. He was amazing.
Hmm. Wow. Fascinating. Especially to really investigate musical talent. You see all these proteges and all these like super kids who was just beyond, you see all these little reels and little news
Yeah.
blips, and it just amazes some of the talent they have, and it's God given. Um,
Yes.
Truly, God given. I was never given zero musical anything. I listened to Loch Lomond and Simon and Garfunkel, and
That is, I believe, one of the pieces on my YouTube channel. So we went to Loch Lomond. I'm pretty sure it's up there. And if it's not, it's in my husband's computer somewhere and I'll find it.
yeah. Well, I'm moved by that. I watched Wuthering Heights,
Hmm.
the original Wuthering Heights from 1939 with Olivier, and I watch that all the time. It's not a happy thing to watch, but I love that piece of history. Uh,
Hmm.
I don't have aspirations to go into it. We talked about,
Right.
but I watched, that piece of history in that time, and I marvel at it. But it's funny. So often I thank the universe for letting me live in this period with electricity, And
Yes,
I'm not cut out for candlelight and stuff. So it worked out really fine for me.
I
Um,
feel the same.
good, good. I like this question because it's really relevant to me and my journeys as an author and the stuff I do with authors. Uh, why do you think so many people secretly want to write a book, but they never do?
I think because we all have a story in us. I think because it's something that lasts. And I think we all have this desire that our lives are going to be remembered, that we will be remembered, that we're not just this blip and we're gone. And when you write a book, it is partly that we do have stories. We all have something we want to say, for better or worse. But we all want to say what we want to say, and we want to be remembered, and we want something to leave behind that lasts.
Okay, because that's it's one of my things being with Bold Authors Network and Kay Wagner and
Mhm.
this little group, which is such a nice group. It's like family, and
Mhm.
we dissect and we examine and talk about all these different aspects of the journey. And
Yep.
it is a journey. It's like that movie, the never ending movie, whatever. It's a never ending journey.
It's a never-ending story. I've been in my writers group for it'll be 20 years in September. I now attend by Zoom because they're still in Minnesota and I'm down here. But for a long time, we joked that we were a 10-person marriage because we met every week. We were
Yeah.
friends. We helped each other. We really cared about each other and helping each other to become the very best writers that we could be. So I
Yeah.
hear you on your
It's such
network.
a brotherhood and sisterhood.
Yes.
It's such a
Hmm.
special because we all live it. And
Hmm.
I'm writing. I have my newsletter coming out. Um, I have my newsletter coming out, LinkedIn newsletter, and part of it talks. I wonder if I have the picture. Oh shoot, what did I do with it? Um, but it's an interesting. I had AI help me. I can't find it, but it talks about authors. Um, no, I can't find it. But anyway, I'm just so wrapped up with authors and us
Hmm.
as authors and what I've lived these last 2 years and what I've experienced and the emotional, the journey.
Ups and downs. Yep.
Yeah, and I we'll talk maybe off air, but I want to put together some panels to discuss different things. And that's what I wrote about in my newsletter. That's coming out Friday. Is the the journey that the people who are really close to you. I mean, like close family members, dear friends. Never bought my book. And how do you handle that? And how do you handle it? Does it
Oh,
ever happen to you?
oh yes, yes.
Does
In
it?
fact, I come from, sorry, I'm not good at sitting still.
That's all right.
Um,
Me too.
I my mom has 8 brothers and sisters. I have probably 25, 30 cousins. I have siblings, I have in-laws. And I kind of thought, if you had all supported me, if you'd all talked up my book, it would have made such a difference. And it was just a lot of, oh, one of them's like, oh, can I have a copy? So, gave her a copy, thanks, and walked off, didn't even pay me for it. I'm like, come on, that cost me a lot of money to produce. What are you doing? On the other hand, I think that you just have to have a thick skin and go, oh, well, I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing. And I think too, focusing on the people who do, like for instance, my husband now, he always says, I love the book so much I married the author. Well,
I love
okay.
that. I
he
love that.
yeah, he loves to say that. And he loves the look on people's faces when he says that. I have to say, okay, so my cousins didn't bother reading the book to my knowledge. So what? Look how much he loves them. Or I think of one of my twins. I'm trying to think. My book came out in 2009, so he must have been 7. And I think this was the year he was 8 or 9. We went up the North Shore in Duluth and we stopped at this restaurant that had a little kind of gift store boutique in it. And here's my 8, 9-year-old son announces to the waitress, "My mom wrote a book. You should have it in your bookstore."
Wow.
Lo and behold, they bought 3 books off me. So we went in
Wow.
to eat dinner. I walked out with $30. And
Wow.
this same son, he would come to book fairs with me occasionally, and he would go around and he would talk up my book to people. And my twins always at the time looked a lot younger than they were. So, to the people they're talking to, it looks like these 2 cute little boys, both with their blonde hair and blue eyes and looking identical. And to them, these little boys come up and are talking up their mom's books. And so they would show up at my booth and go, "Oh, your sons are so cute. They were telling me all about your book," and they'd come and check it out. So, yeah, I've got people who didn't support me, but I've got other people who did. And in the end, I love what I'm doing. So,
We do. We
yeah.
do love what we're doing, but I'm so glad I asked that because it's a real thing with me, and I have
Hmm.
to come to terms and try to understand, and it's a heavy thing, and I want to begin exploring that, and I started to explore it with a group, and maybe we'll put together a panel to talk about that
Hmm.
because I think sometimes I think I'm the only one, but I guess not. We
Oh,
all.
I'm guessing it happens to many people.
Many
And
of us, because people,
yeah,
that little poster I made up, it said, authors are people too. I have
yeah,
a feeling, and so many people along the journey expect, well, they expect me to give them a book. I
yeah.
can't do that. That's 5 years of
Well,
my life.
and I'm thinking too, there's an interesting question in this. Why do people do that? Because it is such a huge accomplishment to write a book. And I think that sometimes either they don't really appreciate it because they haven't done it. And I think, as you said, so many people want to write a book. I think that there is a little bit of, I hate to say it, but jealousy.
Yeah,
Like, why didn't I do that? Just not wanting to support them because they wish they're the ones who had done it.
interesting. You also said something really interesting. Is your husband? I love that. I'm going to use it, by the way. I love the book so much. I married the author. I think that's.
Uh-huh.
But my reaction and my dealing with this subject that we're off topic talking about, and how I deal with it, is contrary to how my wife would do it. And so
Hmm. Is she an author too?
no, 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 she's a
Okay.
teacher,
Okay.
we've been together 49 years. It's a long time.
Wow. Congratulations.
Thank you. That's to some way there's an award buried in
It
that.
does. Yeah.
Award there, uh, uh, better than all my authors awards. But it's so interesting because I react because it's just who I am, and it's like Popeye said, "I am who I am.
Right.
I am who I am," and the way I react to that scenario, and it's completely diametrically opposed to what she believes. Uh, and it's so interesting, Laura, because we had an interesting conversation, a 49-year leading up to the conversation. I said to my wife not too long ago, in how I react to that scenario,
Hmm.
I said to my wife, we've been married 49 years. Without a doubt, you know me better than I know me. You are unbelievable. And of course, you don't understand why I react the way I do. But you know what? You know me so well, but guess what? You don't know what it feels like to be an author.
Hmm.
Norman Mailer said, for authors, writing a book is like giving birth. We're birthing a baby. Uh,
Yep.
so,
And that's, I've given birth to 9, so
you
I
know,
think I can speak to that.
yes, you
But
can.
it's very true, it's this big chunk of your life and you go through, I mean, even to say a thing like morning sickness, that can be really awful. Editing a book can be really awful. It can be
Correct.
so hard. And
Correct.
yet it has to happen, and you wait and you wait. You're always looking forward, and finally, there it is.
Yeah. Yeah. Nicely said. I just want to go off topic for a second, and we're going to kind of wind down. We're winding down. There's a few more things, but I love this question. It's one of my favorite questions to ask. And here goes. Excluding family or friends, somebody living or dead you'd like to spend a day with, and it could be one, two, three, or none. There's no rules.
I think without a doubt that would be Robert the Bruce. And, before I studied his life, I would have said there are so many people, but he is an absolute fascinating character to me. Did you see what was the Mel Gibson movie, Braveheart? Did
Yeah,
you
very
see
hard.
that?
I didn't see that.
Okay, okay. For those who did, they know that Robert the Bruce was portrayed kind of as a weasel. Kind of abandoned William Wallace, chose the nobles, and so on and so forth. But the more I studied his life, I just thought it's a very unfair portrayal. He was fairly young at the time of that battle. I think he might have been 22. Okay, 22 in medieval times was, I hate to say it, but much more of an adult than 22 today. We are not raising our boys to be men at the age of 18, whereas they were men at the age of 16, probably. Um, but he was relatively young. There were a lot of things going on with, he had lands in England and in Scotland. What's going to happen to my family? I'm not justifying walking off the field, but there were so many things going on that the average person doesn't understand the complexity. And there was also his development. And this speaks a little bit, in fact, to Sean in my book, Redemption. Yeah, as far as I remember historically, he did more or less let William Wallace fail at that particular battle. On the other hand, it wasn't much longer before he was sent to attack the castle of, I'm trying to remember what the elder Douglas's name was, but James Douglas's father's castle. And Mrs. Douglas was up on the castle walls because her husband was, I think, in the Tower of London at the time. And I'm sorry, Robert the Bruce was sent to attack the castle and take it. And here's this woman. I hope I'm remembering accurately. Forgive me if I'm not, but I think she was even pregnant at the time. And she's commanding these troops up on the castle wall. And here's Robert the Bruce. I think that was the year he was 22. And he's like, screw it. I'm not going to keep working for the English king. I'm going to work for the Scottish people. And he turned around and sided with Mrs. Douglas. She wasn't called Mrs. Douglas in medieval Scotland, but I can't remember her first name. Um, and a few years later, James Douglas, as a relatively young man, came and pledged his allegiance to Robert the Bruce. And as Robert the Bruce evolves, his character and his faith are absolutely fascinating to me. And in all my research, I haven't found a book that focuses exactly on how his character and faith developed and what were the exact moments. I can guess at some. I would love to sit down with him and talk about that subject. And then I'd write my PhD thesis, and then I'd be Dr. Laura.
Nice. Nice, nice, nice. Great answer. Great answer. Um, let's talk a little bit about books and brews. It's a really creative concept. It
Thank
is.
you.
Um, how did literature and cocktails become and beer become connected?
That was actually the idea of my publicist. So, as we were talking about before we started filming, I had a publicist for about 2 years. And she was really, really good at getting the attention. She got me on TV in the Twin Cities. I think I was on 3 times, at
Wow.
least three.
Wow.
She got me on first page of the B section of the Minneapolis Star Tribune the day after Thanksgiving when everyone's reading it. And Books and Brews was her idea. So she said, if you have a podcast, that'll get eyes on your book. Well, it hasn't really worked out that way. But you know what? I'm having fun. So I keep doing it. But that was her idea, something unique. It is alliterative. And she called up, she did some research, found Minnesota's first beer cicerone, which is the beer equivalent of a wine sommelier. And she called him up. She called up at AM 950 in Eden Prairie in Minnesota and, pitched this idea to them. They were willing to have me on once a month for 6 months. Actually, it could have gone forever, but that's a different story. And so then she called up Michael and said, "Hey, I've got this thing for you really early in the morning." And I later joked to him, I said, if someone called me and said, "I have this thing for you really early in the morning," I would have hung up. I am not a morning person. But we did our show for 6 months at 8 a.m. in the morning on AM 950, had our first 6 guests. And we were both enjoying doing it. We were not enjoying the fact that AM 950 was charging me to give them content. And yeah, yeah. And if I went out and did the work to find advertisers, then I could have done it for free. But I'm like, you have advertisers anyway, plus I'm paying. I was willing to do it for 6 months to get our name out there, to get experience. And it was a great experience. But then we said, we like doing this, but we don't like some things about the setup, like paying them. And so we went out on our own, started the podcast, found the bumper music, put together some artwork, all of this stuff. And we did it. I think Michael was my co-host maybe for the first 4 years. And life changed for a lot of us in the wake of COVID. It did for him too. And it wasn't a good time for him to be able to keep hosting. And so now my husband co-hosts and he does cocktails. And then I also do Books and Brews Light, which is, I don't do drinks. I just do the interviews. Doing drinks gets to be time consuming and expensive. So I do both.
Okay, good, good, good. Has anything, well, I like this question too. You must have learned so much about authors as you've done this. Anything surprise you? Anything comes to mind about things you've learned about us?
Yeah, I'm not sure if anything surprises me, but one thing that I've really noticed, I'm I think in all the authors I've interviewed, I've met maybe a couple who are like, I did this job and I write. Most authors are like, I play music, I scuba dive, I'm an expert on, I don't know, ants, whatever. I paint. Most authors I've interviewed have at least half a dozen interests, and I'd say those are the ones who don't have a lot of interest outside writing. They're all just their minds go in a dozen different directions. We're what you call polymaths or Renaissance men. We like to do a dozen different things. We like to have interests in activities and hobbies. We like to learn, and we're all over the place.
Okay, okay. I did thoroughly enjoy my time at Books and Brews, and I'm
Thank you.
glad. I'm glad. I'm always I'm a universal guy. The universe puts us together, and there we are.
Mhm.
We are, and to be continued. Um, as we wind down, I'm fascinated about your backdrop there. And am I saying this? Is it Glen Merrill Farms?
Glenn Merrill.
Glen Merrill
Yeah.
Farms. What does that teach you about things like simplicity and peace and nature and the environment?
you, you said we were winding down. Uh, you know,
Huh.
I think I can kind of sum it up if I had to summarize by saying we've been doing this about 4 years now. First, we had our 29 acres in Duluth. So that's what my son calls Glen Merrill Alpha site. And we're now at Glen Merrill Beta site in the Appalachians. So, what you're seeing behind me, this is the view of basically the house next door. So, when I'm coming up our hill, I drive past these hills, and depending where he's got his cows, I see those cows down there in the valley. And then we get to our house. We also have steep hills. You would see sheep if this were our land instead of the land next door. So when we started this, I had gone from Brooklyn Park, Minnesota, which is very urban. Your listeners might know it because it's had a knack for getting itself in the news the last year or so. That's where I lived, less than a mile from one of the police stations that was shot at a few years ago. I walked past that on my way to the community center to teach. So we went from that, all the neighbors, as you talk about, to being on this land with the woods and bears out in the woods and raising rabbits. I've had to learn how to process a rabbit, or as we say around here, send it to freezer camp. I've had to learn how to process chickens. I've had to get a whole lot less squeamish about things like, worms or bugs. And my view has changed. Oh, those bugs are good. They're processing things in the ground to make the earth fertile. But I think the way I can best sum it up is when we made this change, one of my friends in my writers group was kind of concerned, maybe a couple of them, and said, "Are you really happy?" And I think about that comment so often when I go out and our sheep are kind of basically behind me past the wall. I go out in the morning and they're yelling at me, and it's hilarious. The ewes have these big, deep voices, and the rams go, meh, meh. But the ewes are yelling at me. They're just, rah, feed us. And they'll shout at me until I give them their food. And I think I get my UTV and I'm driving through our hay fields. I'm checking on our beehive. I'm scratching our friendly sheep's head. Some of them run away, but some of them are friendly. This is my traffic jam. Instead of, New Yorkers giving me the finger and honking at me, I've got sheep yelling, feed me. And as soon as I do, we're all happy. This is my world. It's grass and trees and hay and animals and these cute little rabbits. We have little tiny bunnies about a week old right now, just getting their white fur in. What's not to like? And simplicity. There's a lot to be said for work. Now, one of the things I'm working on two memoirs right now, one about our land in Duluth, one about the ongoing learning process. And one of the things that I think from my experience, part of the problem with modern life for most of us, we're replaceable. Whatever your job is, if you're an accountant, there are thousands more accountants. If you're, okay, a music teacher, there are tens of thousands of music teachers. Now, I taught all the instruments. I was a little harder to replace. But frankly, for most teachers, if you need someone to take over your studio for a week, you can find a piano teacher to do that. Whereas when I'm here, if I don't go out and feed and take care of those animals, they're going to die. I have to be out there taking care of them. And I think that when people lived that life, they were more dependent on each other, but they also knew that meant they mattered because people depended on them. And I think that changes your sense of self-worth. It changes your sense of your place in the world. It tells you that what you're doing matters, if not to anyone else, to those animals. I have to be here to take care of them. And if I can't be here, I need to make absolutely sure that there's someone 100% reliable who will be here. And luckily, we actually have two farm hands. One of them comes 5 days a week, and then Terry comes just on Sundays. They're both 100% reliable. If they say they're going to be here, they are. And but I know, and I think they know too, what they're doing here matters. So that's a huge part of what I've learned from this life.
Listening to you talk about animals, uh, I love animals too. And in 1975, there was a confluence in my life of different things, being worried about the environment and cows
Hmm.
eat grass. We have to water the grass, and cows gives off methane and helps to heat up the earth,
Right.
and being a humanitarian. So all these things converged on me in 1975, and I stopped eating anything with four legs.
Hmm.
Haven't as a commitment. And I loved, I still love. Of course, I haven't eaten it since '75. Hot dogs, hamburgers, steak,
Hmm.
all that stuff, corned beef and cabbage. I mean, I just haven't eaten it since 1975 in my own personal commitment to
Yeah.
that, which is powerful if you think about it. And
Well, I think it's important to live by our beliefs.
yeah,
If you believe something, you should live up to it.
and I did. And you know what? I think I was rewarded because a few years ago I did some heart tests, and I had zero coronary artery plaque. Uh,
Nice.
that's a debatable thing. Where did it come from?
Hmm.
Genetics, maybe 10, 15%. But the fact that I don't put red meat into my body, I eat chicken, turkey, and stuff. I'm not perfect.
Hmm.
But so maybe that helped to preserve this thing here that works so well at 80 years old. Who knows?
Right.
Who
Yeah.
knows? Um, Last question. Your work explores redemption, faith, sacrifice, identity, all these wonderful um, themes. Why are these themes so important to you?
I guess because I often joke I was born with midlife crisis, and that can have one meaning of, you're going out and buying the sports car or whatever. But I think of it more as in from a very young age, I just was born with this innate sense of we only have this much time. We only have one life. How are you going to use it well? And I think those themes are part of you need to be thinking about these things to really live your life well, to live your life with character. We're all going to screw up at some point. How do you redeem yourself? What do you do? Are you looking at yourself and saying, do I need to change? Am I the one who's wrong? These things matter to life. And if more people were thinking like that, instead of like Sean in the beginning of the book, that life is about me and having fun, how different would this world be?
Hmm.
And one of the things that I found, I think that we as a society today don't want to hear anything about character and morality and putting other people first. I think we have become very self centered as a whole in society. It doesn't work to go up to someone and say, hey, you need to change or society needs to change. And even though I didn't do this deliberately, I was just, to me, when I was writing the book, it was almost more like I'm just transcribing what actually happened to Sean and Neil. I didn't feel like I was making it up or, creating a story. I definitely didn't feel like I was trying to put these themes in. They're just the things I think about. So they came out. But one thing I did learn after writing the book, somebody who does not see the world even remotely like I do, not in any way, shape, or form, read the book. We had never talked about anything else. And she said, I need to be more like Neil. And that really struck me because it's like, but Neil is absolutely nothing like everything you profess to believe in our modern society. And I realized, stories where saying something directly or trying to use logic or write a thesis about why you should think this way or act this way, they don't, especially now, they don't do any good. But when people get into a story and see the human side of it, oh, look how Sean is living for himself, and look at all the impacts it's having on all the people around him. And now he goes to this world where how he behaves matters. And here we are back to how you behave matters. If he wins this war against the English, it matters. Whereas he comes to realize, okay, and I love music. Sean loves music. I think music is very important. I really do. But whether you play a great concert tonight or not, it doesn't matter in the same way winning this battle against the English matters, even if you die fighting that battle. If you stop the English from getting to your wives and children, that matters. And nothing against today's English. I'm talking about the England of Edward II. So nothing against the English, but you see what I mean. And when people see that in a story, it gets into their thoughts in a way that just saying it doesn't.
Okay. Nicely put. And this, our time together has been great. I got 4 pages of notes I've been scribbling, and thank you for that, Laura.
You're like me, I'm a note taker.
Yeah, I am who I am. I took notes. This has
Yep.
been great, truly. And formally on air, inviting you to come back. We can come up with authors, things, and some of your new projects that you're working on. I sit in this chair 12 hours a day. I'm loyal to our kind authors, and
Mhm.
important to me. So I'd love you, to come back and to be continued.
Yeah,
So
that would be great. I would love that.
yeah, we'll be in touch. I'm going to stop recording. Don't leave. We'll do a 2-minute wrap. But thank you so much, Laura. This was great.
Thanks.
And I love what you said. I put a little asterisk there. You were born with a midlife crisis. I think that's great. By the way, I love that. I may use that. I'll give you
I
credit.
think a lot of writers were, to be honest. I
Yeah,
think that we're all very driven to experience life and to use the time we have, which is why we have a dozen different interests, all of us.
correct. Correct. So well, I'll give you credit for that. That's a great expression. Born with a midlife
Thanks.
crisis. Great. Thank you, Laura. Don't leave.
Thank you.
Thank you.